So hi and welcome back to the next video. So this is like the blog news app video with nest.js and Angular, of course. So you can see it here. Before we were doing like like a video for every code change that was there. And now we are changing this so that we have like released versions in GitHub. And for every version that's coming out, there's a video that is explaining what happened. So in this video, basically, there was just updated some dependencies, for example, Angular to Angular 13 or nestjs to version 8. And you can see it here in the green one. It's like the version 0.1.0, so it's not a final release. So we have to do some stuff in the next versions, so like bug fixes or adding new functionality. And in the bottom right corner, you can see how it's looking at the moment. So you can see the blog entries, you can create a post and so on. And the main technologies that we are using are Docker, Nest.js and Angular. And now we have here like a little table of contents. So first we have our project summary, where we have like a high-level view of the project. We look at the running project version in 0.1.0. We talk about what this project is aiming for, and also look at our Docker file and Docker-compose file, because these are also new added. Then in chapter 2, we look at our front end. So we look in the Angular code structure, go through the Angular code, and first a little bit more high level and then more detailed. This goes the same for the backend chapter, where we look first at our nestjs code structure, then we go through the code, more with a high level view and then more with a detailed view. And at last we have our next steps, where we look at and identify next steps for this project. So let's start first with the project summary. Here you want to have like a high-level view of the project. You want to look at the running project in version 0.1.0. Want to look what this project is aiming for, and also have a look at the Docker and Docker-compose files and how it's all running. So here we have our GitHub repository, and you can see here what it is all about. We want to have like a blog with articles. The backend is built with Nest.js and the front with Angular, and the whole project is now Dockerized. So basically you can register a user, you can log in with a user, you can publish and manage articles, and so on. We can quickly go over the README. So before 2022, for every step that I made here, there's a video on YouTube, and the commits are prefixed so that you can always go to the video and hear what I'm saying. But up on 2022, this changes. Because then there will just be a video for every release, and there we go later. So you can see it here, we have now one release. So 2022, I Dockerized the project and I updated like all the dependencies to the most recent version. So for example, Angular, since this was made in 2020, was on version 9 and Nest.js in version 7. So I updated these and Dockerized the whole project. So you can run it basically with just Docker-compose up, and everything spins up and you can just visit localhost. So like it says here, you can just hit Docker-compose up, and then you go to localhost 4100 and everything should work. If you want to remove some images or all images in all containers, you can use these commands, and you can also run this without Docker. Then you have to follow this explanation here. So now we have like releases, and here you can see there's one release from 2022. This was made by me. This is a pre-release of version 0.1.0. There will be a YouTube video coming up this year exactly. We updated the main dependencies and the main features are here. And there will be new releases this year. For example, one where we make bug fixes and one where we implement new features and so on, or refactor some stuff. So let's go to our code base. You can see it here. We have our API folder where our Nest.js stuff happens, our front end where our Angular stuff happens. We have an E2E folder where we have some E2E tests with Cypress. We have a Postman collection here with all our requests, and we have a Docker-compose file. And here we can go over. I will zoom in a bit for you. So here you can see we have version 3.8 of Docker-compose, and we have 4 services. One, our API, our Nest.js backend. our front end, our Angular front end, our Postgres database that our Nest.js backend is connecting to, and our Postgres admin tool that, for example, if you want to make some custom SQL queries, we can use this to connect to our Postgres database. So if we look at our Nest.js service, you can see it here. We are building it from our Dockerfile in our API folder, and we are targeting the develop stuff here. So here we have our Dockerfile and our API, and here we want to target the development. So we are using this here and not a production one. So we are using Node in version 14. We have a working directory in our container. We are having here our package JSON to have all the dependencies. We install them and we run it. And we expose our port 3000 so that we can connect to it. And here you see we mount some hosting directories to our Docker container so that, for example, if we change here something in the code, we can reflect, or these file changes get reflected and we can see it immediately. You can either start it in debug mode or in dev mode, whatever you want. And here you can see in the package JSON, for example, when the debug goes to port 9229. And this depends on the Postgres database or Postgres service. And in our environment secrets, you can see it here, database URL, node end, JWT secret, and port. This here is, for example, our user password, our stuff for our Postgres database, exactly this here, so that this API is able to connect to our database. And we map the ports here for the normal service and for our, we run it in debug mode. Then we have our Angular frontend. This is basically like the same. We have our Docker file in our API in our frontend folder. That is also just using Node 14, a working directory, installing all the dependencies in package JSON. We are also using the Angular CLI, and then we just build it and expose port 4200. And here we link it to our API service, so to our Nest.js backend. And then we have just our Postgres database that is using the Postgres image 10.4. And here we have specified how we can connect to it, the user password and DB. And this is here in our database URL from Nest.js. We also do some port mapping, and the Postgres adminer is there if you want to manually connect to our database. So now we can start up everything, and so we just need our simple command docker-compose up in our folder, and then this should build everything and start everything. So if you are doing it like the first time, then it probably needs some more time because it needs to download like all the images, for example, from the Postgres database and so on. And here you can see it starting all the services, so the API service, the Postgres service, the front-end service, and so on. So you can now see all our services are started correctly. So our Nest.js had all the modules initialized, Angular has mapped, has built everything. And so we can now go to our browser to port 4200. You can see it here. And now you see here our starting page. So here this is named all blog entries, or the home page, where we have at the moment, I already created one blog. So it says that a new video for the other series was published. And you can already see here, so since 2020 there weren't done any updates here on the design. So one of the main goals, like in the next versions of this project, should be to make the design much better. So you can see here we have here like a paginating. If we have multiple articles, I can go to the article here, and here you see this is like the title, and this is yes, the subtitle, the author. So this was just a test user. I can go to this profile of the author. I can see his blog entries, so his articles. I can see the content here. So this is like not very well designed, but this should be changed in the next stuff. I can log in, or I can also register like a new user. So for example, I can name myself Oliver. This could also be my email. And I need a password. And here you can also see that some stuff was done here to display that, for example, the passwords are not matching. And these should also be like refactored. So I can now register, and then I could log in, because at the moment when I create, I think I'm already logged in. You can see it here from before. So the block token, if I remove it, I think I should not be able to go to create post. So you see when I get redirected to this. But if I log in, and I'm not logged in before, then now we have here our block token, and I can go to create post and could create a post. And here we have like our JWT. If I copy it, if we paste it in here, you can see this consists of the header, the payload, and the signature. And in our payload, we have my user data, so my ID, my name, my username, the email, the role, and the profile image, the issued at time, and the expiration time. So I can do now something with it. For example, here I can create a post. I can upload an image. At the moment, this is stored to the file server, to the file system stored. I can type the test title. I can type test description. And I can also format my text here with Markdown, for example, bold. And then this gets bold here. So this is like a preview. And I can then add this block entry. And then you can see now we have 2 block entries. What else I can do? I can go to the admin. At the moment, this is empty. So this is also some stuff for a new version. I can list all users. So you see it here. At the moment, I have like 3 users, all with the role user. I can go to every profile. And for example, Thomas is not having made any block entries or articles, but test has 1, or Oliver has also 1 here. You could also have a profile picture. I can filter it by username. So if I type Oliver, then I just see Oliver. If I type Thomas, I just see Thomas. If I type T, then I just have the ones that have a T in the username, and so on. I can also go to update profile. I could change my name, my username, and maybe later also properties like password, email, and so on. And I can also log out. Then just my JWT gets removed from the local storage. And this was it. So now let's have a look at our Angular code structure and go through our Angular code. First a little bit high level, and then we go through all the components and services. So here we are in Visual Studio Code. We go to our front-end folder, and then you can see here in the package.js we have all our dependencies. And then we can go to our source folder here. One of the main stuff is our proxy.conf file. So we need to go to the API service from our Docker-compose. So this is our backend, so our API where we get the data from. So we have an asset folder where we have a placeholder for the block entry images that we could use. So this is like an old thumbnail that I made. These are just some environment stuff that we actually, I think we are not using at the moment. And then we have our app folder. So at the top, we have our app module that is like importing like all the stuff from Angular material that we are using. And in our app routing module, we have our admin route where we lazy load the admin module. And here we have to say at the moment, you can see here, this is the admin module. That's just the overview component that is like nearly empty. So we don't nearly need to look into this at the moment. And then we have some routes. So we have the login route with the login component, the register route with the register component. We have the path users with the children, the users component where we display all the users, and with the ID parameter where we then display like a specific user profile. So this here would be example the route here then for the ID 1. Then we have a path to update a profile, and here this is, for example, secured by an authentication guard, and the same goes for create block entry where we can create a block entry or an article. And then we also have like to view just one block entry by its ID. and a home component. So first we can maybe go into our auth-guard. So we have here a folder guards where our auth-guard is, where we just check if the user is authenticated or not. So if he is not authenticated, then we navigate him back to the login route and we return false. And if he is authenticated, then he can access this routes. So this is our authentication service where we check if he's authenticated. So when we go to the authentication service, you can see it here. We have the login, logout, register. So this is some stuff that we look later. And is authenticated that we're using here. So we just look in the local storage if we have our JWT there, and then we check if it is expired or not. And the helper is the JWT helper service from this Angular JWT package. So this should return false, either if there is no JWT or the JWT is not valid. So then on the highest level we have also an interceptor, and this is where that to intercept all the requests against our backend to check if there's like a token inside our local storage, and then it clones the request and adds the token so that our backend can always authenticate the user who is making this request. Then in our model folder we have an interface for our block entry, so with ID, title, slug description, and so on. All the properties. The same goes for the metadata. For example, these are for the pageable stuff, so total items, item count, items per page, and so on, that we get from our backend when we want to paginate some stuff. So you can see it here. This is the block entry, so the articles pageable interface that consists of these here. And for our user interface, the users have an ID, a name, a username, email, password, and so on. So then we could go like through the components, and then every time we are using like a service, we also go into the service. So we can start with the home component. Here we have just like display the heading all block entries, and then we are using our app all block entries component where we insert our block entries, and we also listen to the paginate event from this component. So we can go to our block entries, and here we are simply loading them to our block service.indexAll. And here we have like some parameters for our backend, the page and the limit. So for example, page 1 and the first 10 items we want to have. And then we make a simple GET request against our backend with the parameters. So we would then give these block entries that we get here. So with the async pipe, we are automatically subscribing to our observable here. And then we are giving them as an input into our block entries component. So we can now have a look at this. Where are we? So we have here block entries component. You can see it here. It has an input block entries. We have a paginate change, so then we emit like an event, so an output event to our parent component. And then we can go through our HTML, and here we simply have like we are iterating over our block entries, our items, and display them here. And if we click, for example, on a card, then we navigate to our route with the block entry ID, and then we display just this. So here we also need to do some refactoring, or for example, here we want an alt attribute and so on, done in new or in other versions of the series. So you can see here, for example, we are displaying the title, the description, and the author name, and so on. And here we have the paginator if we have multiple block entries. Then we have here our create block entry. So this is like a reactive Angular form. So form group. And here, for example, we can upload an image. And this goes here with the file upload. And here we are just using the form data from this file to upload this to our backend. And we are also rounding the loaded time to have like a progress bar deployed. And when we go to this block service, you can see it here. We are making a post request with the form data, and we want to report the progress so that we can display like the progress bar, and we want to observe these events. So if this is, for example, here, then we are simply, where are we? So if we have here like a value in the form in the header image, then we are getting this image with the value from our backend. So we can now have a look at our form. So here our form, we have an ID, we have a title, a slug, a description, a body, and a header image. And here now we have all the form fields, for example, the input for ID. And you can see it here. This is disabled so that you cannot set it. So if we go to create post, you can see this is disabled. So this will be generated by the backend. And then the title, slug, description, body, header, image. And these are all basically here like input fields. They have a placeholder, always a description, and so on. A placeholder and the form control name. So this is like the description then, for example. This is the title, this is the ID that connects here to our Angular form. And then here we have like our text area where we can enter Markdown. We are using there a Markdown module from NPM. And here we are displaying this Markdown simply by getting it from the form, the value, and displaying it with the Markdown pipe. And then we have a button where we can like submit everything and add this block entry or this article. And this is disabled if the form is invalid, for example. So you can just hit it if everything is there. If we want to view a block entry, then this is like our ID route. And here we simply get the image from our backend again, because here we are just for this block, we are just saving like the name or the link of this image, and so we can get it from the backend. If there is no image, then we have here like a placeholder. This is the placeholder that is in our asset folder that we looked at the beginning. And then we have just here some basic styling for the title, description, author name, and so on. And we could also go to the author profile. And we can see it here. If we hit the route, then this block entry is observable, is loaded. So we subscribe to the parameters of our activated route, where we have, if we go to a post, we have here the ID in the route as ID. So we get our param ID. And then we go with our block service against our backend and want to have the block entry with the ID 1 in this case. And then we just display it. So we could also remove this map here then in another version. So this is like a very simple component. So we could now go to the user stuff. So first we have our users component where we display all the users. So we have one filter by username where we make a find by name. And let's have a quick look where we are. To find by name, we are going against our backend with the pagination first page or 0 page, and we want to have the first 10 results and the username, and then we map the result. So we can also remove this later, I think. and set the result here. So our data source to display, we then set to the result that we want to display in our table, and we subscribe to it. And then we have here if we have like a data source, so this is initially null, and this is just being filled in our ng on init, or if we search by username, so then we init it and we just find like the first page and the first 10 users with our data source, and set our data source here. And then if our data source is set, we are going to display it with our met table, and we set the data source to our items because we get back from our backend like a paginated object, and we just want to display the items here. So in every row, if you click on it, you can navigate to the profile route, and then you just see one profile of a user, and otherwise you can see it like here. We have just like a table with ID, name, username, email, and role, and these are just all the cells. So we have the header cell, for example, for ID, for name, username, and so on, and the cells for ID, name, username. And at the bottom we have our make paginator, and this gets from the metadata from our data source the total items and items per page, some object size options, and if we make a pagination event, so if we want to have more than 10 users, we could like here paginate to the next page. This would make an on-paginate change here. It would get like the page index and page size, and then make a request with these parameters against our backend to get all the users from the next page, or from the specified page. Then, for example, if you click on a user, you can go to his profile. This is just if the user is loaded. So here we again get the user ID from the activated.params. So if we are here, we get this I1, this is stored here as ID from the parameters, and have here the user ID, and then we just load our user service find one and get the user by ID from our backend. Also, we load then all the block entries that this user made from our backend, so that they can be displayed here in the profile. And if he is solving multiple articles, this is also paginated. So here is very simple. We also are again displaying like the profile image if we have one. And here we could also add like a default image if there's nothing specified. And here we load this profile image from our backend. And then we just display like the username, the role, and so on. Next, we have our update user profile. This is basically our user profile, which with the Angular form group. This displays all the data. And if we are changing some stuff and we click that we want to update our user, where are we? Then we make just an update or a put request against our backend here with the new data, and then this gets changed in the database. Then we have our last two components that are the register and the login. So in register we have a simple Angular form group, the register form with form control name, username, email, password, and password confirm, where we check if this is all correct. And then we have our button to register a user, and if this is all correct, then the button is enabled. If the form is invalid, then you cannot click it, so it's disabled. So every form field also has like a hint. For example, if the specific stuff is having errors, so this password here, for example, from the form, and we display password is required. And you can see our form is here. We have name, username, and we are all having the validators required, so we need this value. And for email, we also check against the basic, if it's like confirm with the regex for email, and a min length of 6, and the same goes for password. and if we check if it has a number. So we do this by custom validators, where we check against if there is contained a number, where we just test against our regex if our value here that we have here is having a number in it. If yes, then we add null to the validation error, so nothing. But if there's something, we add like a password invalid true. So then we have like control.value.errors or something like this, password invalid true. And then we display an error, and this form is not valid, and you cannot register a user until it's valid. So then we also have our passwords match. And here this is applied to our complete form, to the validators. Also a custom validator where we have an abstract control, and we get the values from the form from password and confirm password, the values here. And then we check if they are the same or equals. Then we add null, but if they are not matching, we add like a password not matching validation error to this form. And you can see it here. If the form has like the passwords not matching error, then we display also passwords are not matching. So this is also very simple. Then we have our login component. Basically our login form where you have to specify your email and your password. And this goes basically the same. If we have errors, we display the errors. And if it's not valid, the form, then you cannot log in or try to log in. And you can see it here. If you log in, if the form is invalid, then we just return. But if it is valid, then we navigate you to the admin route. So if everything works. And you can see it here. I think we also set in this login here. You can see it here. We make a post request against our backend with the email and the password. Then we also set in our local storage the JWT token that we get from our backend, so that everyone knows we are logged in. So now let's take a look at our API. So at our backend, you can see it here. We have our Docker file that we need, that we already looked at. We have all our dependencies here, all our scripts, and we have a top level and upload folder where we store at the moment the block entry images that the user uploaded here, for example, and some profile images where if you upload a profile image, it would land here. So you could also connect this later to, for example, an AWS S3 bucket and not store it in the file system, or you can store it in the database, whatever you like. You could just change the implementation. So here in our source folder, at the top, we have just a basic controller, get hello. So this is just something that we could also remove later. And with our app module, where we have a serve static module, to serve the front end. Since we not Dockerized everything, we could also, remove this later. We have our configuration module to have access to all the .env or environment variables that we defined in our docker-compose file. And here we have our typeorm module that connects to our database also. And here we need also the process.env variables. And we have set it to autoload entities and synchronize it. And of course, we import our other modules, the user, auth, and block module, so these three here, so that we can use them. So let's start in our authentication module. Here, we are also using the config service for our JWT module from nest.js. And we set our secret for our JWT from our config service, the JWT secret, that we get from our Docker-compose file, and we sign the JWT with expires in 10,000 milliseconds or 10,000 seconds here. We have our providers, and we export our service so that we can use it in other modules too. So we have a role decorator where we check has a specific role. We can see it later in action. We have an authentication service that is just there to generate a JWT, to hash a password, and to compare a password against a password hash in the database. We have a JWT guard that we specify to use. We have a strategy that's using the passport strategy, where we want to extract the authentication header and say it's a v0 token. And we say our secret is from our config service, the JWT secret that we get from our Docker-compose file. And if we validate, we want to have like our payload user in return. We have a roles guard where we check if the user is having the specified role. So we can see where we are using this, for example. For example, in our user controller. We can quickly have a look at it, and this will be easier to understand. So here we are using our has role decorator from here. And then we check against our user role admin. So we need the admin role, for example, if we want to delete something. Or for example, if we want to update one, we check if the user is a user. So we use guards. And then we check here if the user is the user. So from our request, we get a params and we get the user that got added in our JWT strategy, I think. And then we just check. We get the user from the database, and then we check if it's the same then in the params. And then we have like the permission true, and then we return if the user and the permission has permission, then we return it true, and then we can like update this, otherwise not. And we are always using the JWT authentication guard. And here, for example, we just get from our reflector the roles. For example, then the admin role. Give it 1 second. So just admin here, so that we could later have like a role system. So that, for example, an admin can also change whatever or delete complete articles. And then so we check here if he's having or if the role that the user is having is specified also in the needed roles that is specified in the controller here. And then we return this either true or false. So this is like basically the auth module that we are needing also in the block and user module. So first go through our user controller. So we have basic requests to create a user, to log in a user, and then we are just returning like our access token with JWT. We have find one, so we can find a user by his ID. And we can also like get all the users paginated. So when we have a page, the limit and the username that could be specified. And then we make a paginate request against our backend and or our database in this case. And here we also have like implemented like I think the delete stuff, the update role of user, and upload file. So the file upload is interesting. So we are getting here the upload file from nest.js, and there could be uploaded like an image. And for example, we have also get for the profile images, where we return from our uploads profile images folder here, and then the image with the image name. Then we can go to our user service. And here we are also using like the repositories and so on from type ORM. So we want to create a new user, then we set like the username, the email. We first create from the password hash, and just want to store this in the database. And we always give the user at the moment the role user. So later we could also give, for example, make for the administrator, for example, that he is able to change the roles of users, for example, to editor or whatever. Then we save this user to our database, and we remove the password from the return and just remove or return the result, so the user that was generated. We have a find one where we just return the user by ID, and we also return it with the relation for block entries, so that we return the user and all his block entries. We have a find all where we return all the users, and we always remove like the passive property. We could always do this like a little bit smarter later in a refactoring, because we could specify here in our user entity for the password that we have to select it. But we don't want here select false, then we shouldn't need this all the time here to delete this property. We have a paginate request where we use where are we? The paginate from the package nestjs-typeorm-paginate to paginate through all the users. And here we have a paginate filter by username. So for example, if we are searching for the username in the front end, then we make this request against our database, where we skip, take, we order them by ascending, we select ID name, username, email, and role, where the username is like this is like wildcards. So for example, if I just have a T here, then Thomas would always be in return, and then we build our response object. We can also delete one user, where we just make a delete request against our repository. We can update a user, but we never at the moment are able to update the email, password, or role. So these are always stripped off here, so they cannot be updated. And we can always make this like better in a future version, but at the moment it's implemented like this. We can update the role of the user. We can log in. Then first we validate the user here. So we check if we find him by his email. We select the properties, and then we check if the password hash that we have stored is correct with the same, or it's we check it against like the password that the user specified in the login, and if these match, we return it, and if not, we throw like an error. And if it's correct here, so we go from here to there and then back. So if it's correct, we generate a JWT from it and return the JWT to our user. So here we have, of course, our user entity, but this is just like the ID and all the properties like name, username, email, and so on. And before we insert it, we make the email to lowercase, so it's always the same. Then we have our last module, like the block module. Here we have also imported our user module and the authentication module, and our type ORM module or feature has a block entry entity. So maybe let's have a first look at it here. So we have like entity from type ORM block entry, could be renamed later maybe to article, would be clearer, I think. We have an ID, we have a title, we have a slug, a description, a body, created at, updated at dates. We always, before update also the timestamp and set it to the date at this moment. We have some stuff that could be implemented further, like likes for an article, header image we already have implemented, publish date, and so on. And of course, the author, like it has a many to one relationship, so one author can have many articles. We have an interface for it, and we also have an interface for our image. And we have some custom guard, so we check if the user is also the author guard. We can look at this if we are at our controller. So in our controller, we have one stuff where we, here at the top, have our disk storage. And this is coming from Malte, where we actually save our file to our block entry images folder here. So in our uploads and then block entry images. And then we create a file name and the extension and we save it to there. So for example, if you are, where are we? Uploading the image, we are using interceptor, the file interceptor. And you can see it here, it's also coming from Nest.js Express. And then we are using here our storage that we defined here, and we save it to this storage. And then as a return, we are returning just the file. Then in our stuff here, we are always using the JWT authentication guard, so we need a valid JWT. That gets checked from our JWT authentication module here, so it checks for the correct secret and so on. If you are creating a block, we are having the user so that we can save both of it in the database. Then we have like a next request, a get request here to paginate through the block entries. And here we have like our query parameters page and limit so that we can paginate through it. And if the limit is bigger than 100, then we set it to 100. Otherwise, we use limit, for example, then 10. This is like here the default value if it's not specified. You can have, I think, paginate just through the block entries by a specific user. So there we also give him the user ID then, where we want to paginate through. We can find a block by his specific ID. So just to find one, we can update it also, like change the title. We can delete one. And here you see it, we always check not just with the JWT guard, but also this user as alpha guard. And this is this here, where we are switching to HTTP. We get the request. And we have our parameters, our block entry ID and our user. Then we get our user and we get our block. And then we check if our user ID is the same as from the block, the author ID. If it is the same, then we can return true that it has permission. And if it's not the same, then we know, okay, someone else is trying to make this request and we deny it. And then this guard stops the user from changing something, deleting it, whatever. So it's used here in the delete or in the update and in the delete stuff. So we already had our upload file and we have our find image with simple get, where you can always you get the image that you want by the file name or by the image name, and this is from the uploads block entry folder. So now we can go through our block service. So we have here our block repository. That is again a repository from type ORM. So we have some basic methods available. So we can create a block where we first generate a slug. So it's like a human readable title or URL that we can use or whatever. So we slugify this block, this title that the user entered. And then we set the created slug block entry slug, and then we save it to our repository, so to our database. We have a find all, where we find all or articles by the author. So if we specify, so we find all, and we also add the relations authors to it, so that in the response object we have not just the articles, but also the author included. So the user that made this block, this article. Then we have a paginate all, where we use the paginate function from nestjs-typeorm-paginate package, where you can just specify like some pagination options like page and how many items you want to have, and then this handles everything for you. And we also want here the relation author with us, and then we just return this. And we can also simplify this later. Also, I think we don't need this here. We have paginate by user, so when we have here not just the pagination options, but also the user ID, we are searching in our blog repository, like on our database, for the author, so for the user ID, and we just return these block entries paginated to our front end. So for example, if we are on a profile page from a specific user here, from the test user, and we have the block entries of test, we could paginate just through his block entries that he created. We have a find one, where we obviously just search or find one by his ID, so block entry, and we also include the relations of the author, so of the user who created it. We have a find by user, where we search in our blog repository for the user ID in our author, and we also add the author to it, and the same. Then we have like an update one, where we can update it, so we make a simple update request, and then we have a delete one, and which generate slug is just using a Sluggify from Sluggify npm package. I think, for example, if you have like, you can see it here, like a title new video, and it would, between the new video, would not use, would just make like a dash here between. So maybe we can see it in our network tab. So here we are in WebSocket, we want to have all. And then we have response, and then you can see here, like the slug we have now, instead of the normal title with the white space, this is replaced. So it's very simple. So this is basically our backend, and in the next videos or in the next versions, we are going to simplify it all a bit, make it clearer, fix some bugs, add some functionality, and make everything like a little better, also the videos. So let's have a quick look at the next steps for this project. So obviously we have to do some bug fixes that may be released in a new version. Then we want to refactor some styling and also some Angular material stuff. We can also improve responsiveness. We want to refactor some Angular components and logic that is at the moment just not a good code style, and also refactor some Nest.js or some stuff in our Nest.js backend, because there's also some stuff that we don't need that we could simplify and so on. And then of course we can also add some new functionality, but I think before we do this, we should refactor and improve all of this here.